The Vietnam War was one of the most critical war conflicts in history, claiming millions of human lives. Welcome to History Facts. Today, we are going over the impressive Vietnam War. I intend for you to understand its causes, consequences, and all around it in 10 minutes. So, let's dive in. What was the Vietnam War? The Vietnam War, or Second Indochina War, was a military conflict between 1955 and 1975 between the Republic of Vietnam, also known as South Vietnam, and the communist insurgent guerrillas of the National Front for the Liberation of Vietnam, supported by their allied countries. To understand the importance of this war, we have to go back to the origins of the Cold War, which led to the indirect confrontation between the socialist bloc led by the Soviet Union and the capitalist bloc led by the United States. After World War II, the world was divided between these two political ideologies that sought to defend their positions and impose them on the rest of the countries. While the United States defended democracy and capitalism, the Soviet Union, based on socialism, sought to promote economic equality and eliminate private property. At first glance, it would seem obvious which of these two sides caused more damage internationally. However, the conflict between the United States and the USSR escalated, so both countries resorted to amoral practices to dominate their rivals. If the two countries had had a direct confrontation, the world as we know it would have disappeared, because the United States had the atomic bomb and the Soviet Union had the hydrogen bomb. For this reason, the two major superpowers of the world decided to finance the various political parties that shared a similar political and economic vision to help them seize power. Whether through money or using force, any means were valid to win the war, even if it meant leading to the death of millions of inhabitants of a small Southeast Asian country. This is how the Vietnam War began. Origin of the conflict. In 1939, the Southeast Asian region was a colony of the French Third Republic. But in 1940, Japanese troops decided to invade the colony and occupy a large part of the region, while the territory was under the administration of France, which also had a puppet leader under the control of the Germans. The Communist Party took advantage of this opportunity to establish itself in power and spread its ideals throughout Vietnam. To fight against the Japanese occupiers and the French colonialists, the political leader Ho Chi Minh formed the Viet Minh, or the League for the Independence of Vietnam, a guerrilla force composed of communists and nationalists who sought to make Vietnam free and independent again. Thanks to the defeat of Japan in 1945, Japanese troops were withdrawn from Vietnam, leaving Emperor Bao Dai, the last French-educated emperor, in charge of Vietnam. With Japan defeated and France trying to recover from the war, Ho's Viet Minh forces rose up, seizing the northern city of Hanoi and declaring the Democratic Republic of Vietnam. Upon hearing the news, France decided to regain control of the region immediately, backing Emperor Bao and establishing the State of Vietnam in July 1949. Despite their differences, both sides sought the same thing: that Vietnam would once again be unified. However, the main difference between the two supporters was in the countries they supported. While Ho and his supporters wanted a nation modeled after the other communist countries, Emperor Bao and his followers wanted a capitalist Vietnam with close economic and cultural ties to the West. Thus, this conflict provided the perfect opportunity for the United States and the USSR to establish their dominance in Asia. However, only one of these sides would be able to claim victory. Beginning of the war. Although the conflict in the region goes back several decades into the past, active U.S. involvement did not occur until 1954. After Ho's communist forces took control of the North, the armies of North and South Vietnam engaged in a bloody conflict that led to the decisive victory of the Viet Minh at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in May of the same year. That battle marked France's defeat and the end of almost a century of French colonial rule in Indochina. After the defeat of the French, the Geneva Conference was held to decide the future of all the nations that made up French Indochina. Since the conference was held after the victory of the Communist Vietnamese, France's position was fragile. So it was established that France would withdraw its troops and grant full independence to Cambodia and Laos, without the French being able to do anything about it. After the treaty was signed in July 1954, Vietnam was divided into two sections. One of them was in the north, controlled by Ho's communists, and the second was under the command of Bao, who was replaced in 1955 by the anti-communist president Ngo Dinh Diem. The presence of Ngo Dinh Diem in power would lead to increasing tensions between North and South Vietnam until one day the conflict would explode completely. While the Vietnamese were preparing for war, the United States was doing its own thing in the West, seeking to tighten its policies against any allies of the Soviet Union. U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower pledged his support for South Vietnam in 1955. The U.S. military and the CIA quickly took massive measures to get rid of communist sympathizers in the South, arresting a total of 100,000 people, many of whom were brutally tortured and executed. In 1958, capitalist pressure in the South and the political persecution of communists led the Viet Cong and other opponents of Diem's repressive regime to begin contracting against government officials, thus starting the massacre. Domino theory. In 1959, North Vietnam clashed with South Vietnam in a series of shootings and bombings that drew the attention of the United States. By 1960, many of the opponents of the Diem regime had formed the National Liberation Front, a grouping made up of both communists and non-communists. Although the National Liberation Front claimed to be autonomous, many senior U.S. officials suspected that the organization might be an attempt by the communists to take control of South Vietnam, and they were right. For that reason, President John F. Kennedy sent a team to South Vietnam to assess conditions in the country, and the response he received was chilling. He was advised to assemble his army to help Diem deal with the Viet Cong threat and prepare for battle. To this end, the United States made use of the domino theory. A Cold War policy suggested that if a communist government succeeded in establishing itself in one nation, it would induce the rest of the neighboring states to follow, thus causing an entire region to fall into the clutches of communism. Although the theory had no scientific basis, the United States used it as an excuse to justify its involvement in Vietnam. However, President Kennedy did not feel the need to present a large-scale military intervention and was more in favor of giving aid to Vietnam indirectly. But after his assassination, things got out of control. Without Kennedy in power, nothing stopped his successor Lyndon B. Johnson and Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara from further increasing U.S. military and economic support to South Vietnam. In 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin incident took place. The U.S. Intelligence Service created a fictitious confrontation between the U.S. and North Vietnam that served as an excuse to intervene in the war. This led to the displacement of up to 500,000 soldiers sent to fight in Vietnam. End of the war. In the late 1960s, a strong movement against continued U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War developed. Thanks to the advance of the pacifist movement, the Americans who were against the war could use public opinion to lead the government to withdraw its troops from Southeast Asia. That is why on January 27, 1973, under pressure from the people and the media, the government had no choice but to sign the Paris Peace Accords, establishing the end of hostilities and the withdrawal of all foreign forces from Indochina. However, this did not mean the end of the war. On the contrary, the conflict between the two Vietnamese sides continued in 1974 and ended in 1975 with the capture of Saigon by North Vietnamese forces. On July 2, 1976, the country was reunified under the Socialist Republic of Vietnam, a great victory for communism. Consequences of the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War resulted in the deaths of more than 4 million Vietnamese military and civilian personnel and some 60,000 American soldiers, and it caused deforestation and agricultural contamination of the region as a consequence of the use of chemical weapons launched by the U.S. Air Force. As for the West, the war meant a crushing defeat for the American power, which ended up losing all its reputation and prestige. That's all for now. See you in the next video with another interesting topic.